Hey everyone, my name is Patrick, and thank you for joining us on Create, Post, Repeat, a podcast all about the content creation journey. Welcome to the podcast. We are so glad you are here, everyone watching and listening. And I am here with an amazing friend as of 2 or 3 minutes ago, my friend Chris from Underoath. How are you doing, man?
Good old friends, just going way back to 10:07 a.m., which it's a lot in the days post-COVID, I'll take any relationship I can get. So
that is true. And which actually kind of, I have to tell you, you don't know this. I mentioned this to you when I slid into the DMs, but our history does go pretty far back. My band right out of high school opened for the band that opened for the band that opened for the band that opened for the band in a terrible gymnasium at a church where your band, Underoath, was the headliner. I have several stories from that evening that I want to get into. Not yet. We're going to get there in a second. Hear them. but our history is long, my friend.
Oh, I love it. It's funny how, there'll be, times where I'll talk to people in some form or another, and they'll be like, oh, do you remember, we met here, or like you did this thing, and like it'll be something that had like completely left my mind, but then as soon as it gets like re-clicked, I'm just like, oh, holy crap, like I now remember all this stuff that I would have gone to the grave having forgotten had we not met. And I love that stuff. That's cool.
Well, before we actually get into Underoath, I'd love to hear your career has expanded beyond one band, one project. You are now producing, you're creating all these soundscapes, you're scoring for films. What are you doing outside of Underoath right now that you're really excited about, or within Underoath that you're excited about? What are you passionate about right now?
Oh man. Well, as far as creative, music stuff, I'm scoring films. Like that's something that I dove headfirst into that over the last basically since like late 2017. I really dove in and that's something that I've always wanted to do, and I just started doing it basically. And I really see that as something that I would love to be continuing to do when I'm elderly. We spoke a little bit before this started just about getting into our 40s, etc. But like I really, if I could be 65 years old, still in Underoath, still going on tour and doing stuff, I would be like, oh, that's cool, like I would love to do that. But knowing how rock bands work, that's not really a common thing at all. So, but doing this, scoring film, I could just see myself doing this for the duration, I'm not necessarily like wanting to work until I'm dead in the grave. But, even if I were in a position where, I were fine monetarily, I would still, want to take on, one film a year or something, just because it's, it's a creative outlet and stuff. So,
what was that like when you began? Because, I'm sure you started out much like every other, wannabe rock star out there, going, man, I wish I could do this for a living. When was like the first time you realized I'm a working musician, or I am a working producer? I score films for a living. When's the first time that sunk in?
Well, it's interesting because, when Underoath got started, and even, not long before we actually realized we had a career on our hands, we weren't really aspiring for it to be our careers, when we would see like big bands, like bands that had actual careers, and like the band was like the thing they did, for us, that was something that other bands did, that wasn't something that could ever happen to us. I always kind of compare it to like if you love watching movies and then you get involved in your like local community playhouse. It's like you're not going to the movies watching something on the big screen and being like, oh man, like I can't wait to get there. You're like, oh no, that's what they do. And then I go and I act with my community playhouse and it's fun. So that was always kind of our mindset. But then right around 2004, the end of 2004, it was a few months after we had released an album of ours called "They're Only Chasing Safety," and that was really, if I'm looking at any like turning points, that was the one, because we were on Warped Tour that year,
Yep.
and we started off on that tour playing just like this tiny stage, and nobody was coming to see us, and we were going and handing out flyers and trying to get people to come, and it was one of those things where every single day it was just more and more people, and then by the end we were still playing the same stage, but there was just way more people there than could even like really hear because of the crappy PA on the stage. And then we realized toward the end of that year that like we were coming home and we had actually made money, like we were not paying to go on tour. And we realized at the tour that we did after that, we were like, oh, like this money that we just made on this tour is going to pay our bills until the next tour that we have scheduled.
Wow.
And then that was like, oh, wait a second, like this is almost like kind of like a job, and from that point on, it was just kind of a snowball, and it just kept going. And that was a lot of years ago, so it's crazy.
Well, if I could rewind even further, I'm a cries from the past guy.
There we go.
Yeah, I remember.
So you were there when nobody else was caring to come and see us.
Now, I didn't get to see you. Actually, yes, because I saw you guys at a small, I'm pretty sure it was a Christian festival in Florida called Uproar. I think it only happened once or twice.
It happened once. I remember it vividly.
And I've heard, so, this is like before, Spotify, and before, like MySpace was cool. So like there was just not the TikToks and the Instagrams. There wasn't the access that you have.
I think that was even pre MySpace, if I remember correctly, because I think that was like 2002-ish.
Surely. Yeah, 'cause I'd like just graduated high school. So we would hear about, like, I remember the first time Living Sacrifice came and played at my church, and I was like, I can't believe I get to see these guys. Now you hop on YouTube and you can, it's not the same experience, but you can hear some of your favorite artists. You know their set lists because they're posted online, all these things.
Yeah.
And so I'm with my little metal band, and we're like, Underoath is playing. I'm like, who's Underoath? And I begin to kind of like, I like go and buy a CD or listen to my friends, and I'll never forget little Tim coming out there in all of his like glammed out makeup and starting the riff for The Last.
Yeah.
And being like, this is my band now. This is my band. And it's been a treat to watch you guys grow from there. So like, you're right. I was one of those guys at the small stage.
Yeah, that was what's funny about that show in particular is that was Tim's first show.
Yes.
And we had our guitar player that we had like all through high school, that was his last show. And we decided that we were going to play that show as with three guitar players as kind of like I think at the time we were like, oh, we're going to like, ease Tim into it, but it didn't end up working out really well because you had two guys playing just the same parts and it was silly, but
disagree. I thought it was great.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, perfect. No, that was, I actually do remember that show because there was a band there called Ludacris at the time.
Yes.
That played, that ended up becoming Norma Jean. And that was like one of the first times that we met them. And then I remember like KJ52 played, and
I was at the KJ52.
Yeah, I have a video of that actually, of KJ52 set, and there was a guy during KJ52 set that was doing this like crazy breakdancing, and I don't know, not to go off on a tangent, but I remember that well. And it's wild to me to talk about these these sort of things, and then be like, oh yeah, that was like literally over 20 years ago, and then but remembering it like it was like 5 years ago,
Yes.
And yeah.
Well, I mean, it's back before we had all of the technology in our hands, and I think there's something about that where those memories are a little bit more raw, like
Hmm.
because that's all we had were those memories and those
Yeah.
moments, and I cherish all of them. And yeah, I remember seeing Ludacris. That was another band that my friend said you have to come to the social in Orlando. It used to be
Yep.
called the Sapphire Supper Club,
Yeah.
and he said you got to come see this band Ludacris. I said, and they were actually opening for Living Sacrifice, and he
Hmm.
said they are insane, and I was
And they
like,
were.
yeah, and I'm like, oh, like great, like insane music. He's like, no, they're crazy. And I was like, okay, great. And I remember being at the front of the stage. I found footage of this on YouTube at the front of the stage, and they're playing like Act of My Own Volition and all that stuff, like that Throwing Myself album. I was actually
Yeah.
listening to that yesterday, and
Wait, how are you listening to it? Because I can't find it on streamers anywhere.
it's not on streamers. I had to like YouTube it or
Got
something.
it. Okay. Okay.
Because yeah, I was like I'm on the Spotify's trying to find it and stuff. But anyway, that's such a like a near and dear part of like that's my childhood. That's my
Yeah.
growing up years. I mean, I was 17, 18, whatever, but growing up years where I'm just experiencing all this amazing music, and it's been fun to actually watch you guys grow, like watch a career happen in front of me, because I don't get to watch like famous, I'm not in like a famous actor's world, but
Hmm.
music, because there are live shows and things like that, are so much more accessible. And
Hmm.
one thing I remember, let's go back to that one time where I became a rock star and opened for the band that opened for the band, etc., for you guys. Have a very clear memory of you in front of an actual like church piano and going and I'm just talking to you about just trying to build. I'm talking to the band. It was that moment where I was like, I'm talking to the band. How accessible! This is amazing. And you were looking down at this piano, and I said, "Is it fun to play keys or something like that?" And I remember you looking back at me, and you're going, "Yeah, it's pretty cool. I know that this one bong. I know that that one's D." And
Yeah.
I was just like, wow, okay, cool, man. And then to watch you kind of be essentially in the early days, I'm not making this less of a thing, but to be like a synth player, really
Hmm.
like filling out the sound of the band, now to a point where you're posting about gear, you're posting about mixes, you're creating, like I was saying earlier, like these soundscapes that are so entrenched in the mix of Underoath songs that they are essential. Can you like tell me like what that musicality journey was like for you? Do you remember the early days where you're kind of figuring it out to now where you're like looking at all sorts of software synths and apps in front of you that are doing these amazing things, and like what was that growth like? What was that musicality growth like?
Um, I think in short, it was just very, very steady. And it's still happening now. I mean, everyone in our band is self-taught, and we don't really know music theory super, like I've only really delved into theory at all once I started working in film stuff, because
Right.
it was a little more important to know that stuff. So yeah, very gradual, because because my career has been this band. I haven't really had uh, a need to grow my my, I get, it sounds bad, but kind of growing my knowledge of writing outside of the band,
Yeah.
until again, until I started working in film. And um it's been I think particularly from like 2011 till now, like the past 10, 12 years or so, it's been a lot more of a I feel anyway, coming a lot more into my own as a producer, and as a player, and starting, having a lot more Under Oath songs starting off with my ideas, as opposed to me just playing along to what a guitar is doing.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, and because for a long time, particularly back, Cries of the Past time, all that, when I was in high school, the music at that time was written by one guy. Our old guitar player Corey, he wrote everything, minus lyrics. And so basically he would write these songs, and then I would be like, okay, well, how can I fit into this song? And then he left the band right as we got out of high school, and Tim joined. And really, that was when we were like, oh, like we all need to figure out how to write songs because we have not done this before. And so that was a big growing period for sure. And then yeah, it's just been a steady thing, but really, for me, where it really kicked into high gear as far as like, okay, I need to actively work on getting better, learning, writing more. It was really, end of 2017 ish. So, when we went in and did Erase Me, I had a lot
Yeah.
bigger part in that record. Had a lot bigger of a part in Voyeurist as well. And
Yeah.
yeah, and it's been cool for me, to see the same same type of progression for, other dudes in the band as well. Like Aaron is, he's always been a really, really good drummer, but,
Yeah.
seeing him come into his own just, songwriting wise over the years has been awesome. And, Tim is like, a great producer. He when we were working on Voyeurs, we self-produced it, and we had our friend engineer it.
Yep.
But there were so many times where Tim would just be like, okay, here, move. And he would get down and he would actually like do the stuff. So he's gotten, really good. And it's just, yeah, it's cool to see. And, it's, if you look at it a long enough curve, if you're, actively working toward anything, even a little bit, you're going to get better at it. So, yeah.
Yeah, hopefully, right? Hopefully.
Oh, hopefully. Yeah. That's the idea. I'm still trying. I'm still working
Well,
on it.
yeah, when it comes to like the writing and the creating and the creative process, I kind of, tend to think of that as like the studio realm, but you guys have also been a incredible live band for years. And I'll never forget. I told you I was going to keep coming back to this well, but when we did play that show, I'll never forget. It was a several metal genre-ish bands like you guys, and then our band, which is like pretty much just rock and roll. And in the middle of one of our songs, we would break into "Rock and Roll All Night and Party Every Day" by Kiss.
Okay.
Great chorus,
A staple. A staple.
a staple, and
Yeah.
which, by the way, the uh, we would do that very regularly. And when we played a certain Christian coffee shop, they definitely pulled us aside and said, the devil's going to get a foothold if we keep playing that song. Which,
Of course he will.
you got to be he or she or what, you got to be really careful.
Yeah.
So,
Always.
and but as we're playing, rock and roll night party every day, I look up from my microphone, lead vocalist, obviously. No,
Oh, of
I look
course.
up, I look up from my microphone, and Dallas and Aaron are in the pit singing and shouting every word and slamming into kids. And it was so, and that was the moment where I was like, I've made it. I've made
You're
it.
like, I can quit this now. I can on to podcasting.
I was like, first, yeah, on to podcasting. Because first of all,
Yeah.
those guys are clearly my best friends now. And secondly, I'm a rock star. But what's your favorite? Because for Underoath shows, you are known as the live guy. It's not a shock to me that you're getting injuries all the time, breaking your neck, breaking your back, and throwing things out of whack, because you are this energetic presence.
I like to have fun.
Yeah. Do you favor live over studio, or do you favor studio? Like, which is your favorite in the whole creative process? Do you like being in the studio? Do you like being on stage? Which one?
Oh man, it's such a cop out answer to say like, oh, I love them both for different reasons. But I will say that I don't, I think particularly obviously for Under Oath, like I don't think we really know what a song is as far as Under Oath goes until we play it live. And there's just, there's so many, feelings and senses and everything that happens at a live show that, you just can't get that in the creative process. I absolutely love the creative process. I love writing. I love recording. I love tinkering around with instruments. That whole process is amazing. And it's a lot easier physically. I could do it for the long term. So, that's a plus. But, I think that, if I'm looking at it from like a 30,000 foot view and I'm like, okay, I'm on my deathbed, like what's the thing that I'm going to look back on and be like, man, like that was an
Yeah.
amazing experience. I don't think it's going to be all the hours spent in the studio, but all those hours in the studio are what make it to where I can watch a film that I scored and sit back and be like, man, that's really cool. Or stand on stage in front of people and play a song and have them
Yep.
sing it back to us and be like, man, that's really cool. So it's like you can't really have one without the other, but I think as a singular experience, I would probably say the live setting.
Well, I don't think that's a cop out answer because almost every musician that I've been able to interview or even have a conversation with, I think they have a clear answer. They either like
Mm-hmm.
the studio or they like the stage. So to talk about how I think you make a great point. Like the stage wouldn't be there without the studio, but there's a reason why when I'm listening to songs, I love finding the live versions because
Mm-hmm.
there's an energy there that the highest value production sometimes just can't get you to.
Yes. Yeah. And if I also just look at each of those environments in a silo, it's like the amount of time, like the percentage of the time that I am in each of those environments where it feels like work, it's a no-brainer that being on stage is the better move. Because it's like,
Sure.
I would say honestly, 60% of the time, sometimes 70% of the time when I'm in the studio, I'm consciously saying, okay, I need to sit down, I need to work, I need to
Yep.
write because I have a project that has to get done. So it's like I'm doing the work. And it's almost, even though playing live is extremely demanding physically and it takes me away from family and
Yeah.
tours rough sometimes and all that stuff. When I'm on stage, it's not like, oh, this is work. It's like, damn, this is really cool. It's
Yeah.
hard, but it's awesome. So, yeah.
Well, do me a favor if you don't mind. Like, what is it like? You to watch you guys grow up and to follow you on like social media for such a long time. You now are a family man, and what
Yeah.
is it like to when daddy's got to go to work, but that work involves sometimes traveling for long periods of time. How do you balance? Uh, the creative process with these things you've created of family, your kids. How do you balance those two things and create healthy rhythms so that you're actually able to be present?
I think the short answer to that is that it's an ever evolving thing, there was a time, when me and my wife were married before we had kids where, Underoath was touring 8 months a year, 9 months a year. But it was fine because, my wife could fly out whenever she wanted and
Yeah.
we'd spend time together, go do, just couple things in cities and it was fine. And then kids came along and, that became not as viable of an option. Um, so we had to make adjustments there. And then, as we have really gone into like family mode as far as our lives go, we all I think there's like 14 kids in our band.
Wow.
We made it like a conscious decision to only tour a certain amount of time a year because we want to make sure that when we are on tour and when we're playing shows, that we are excited to do it because there was a period
Yeah.
of time where we just kind of felt like beholden to this like machine that was constantly moving and we just kind of had to keep going with it, because we had never known any different, like
Yeah.
from the time we were in high school, just getting out of high school, we were just road dogs and we viewed it as if we're not on the road, then we're not giving the band the effort that it deserves to have. Um,
Yeah.
so we made a conscious effort. We're like, hey, we're only going to tour a certain amount of time a year, and once we kind of put that into effect, like we started saying no to a lot of stuff, which ended up being a good thing. So now, when we're gone, it doesn't make the time away any easier, but there's less of it. And honestly, now it's a lot different than it was even, 5 or 7 years ago, like my kids all have, phones and they can FaceTime me, and we send pictures and we text back and forth, and we're kind of always in contact. So that's a thing that we didn't have back then. Um, and yeah, but then there's also, the whole other end of it of just, being a career creative in general, and having to balance that, the creative process with, having a family, with, having a wife and kids. And,
Yeah.
that's something that I'm still trying to get right. Like
Oh yeah.
I had a period, it was probably like a year and a half ago, where, I've come to a point, me and my wife have been together over 20 years now,
Wow.
and she is, I've just come to learn that I need to, like, if she says something definitively, I just need to go with it, because she always ends up being right.
Yes.
And she told me, she's like, you need to implement office hours for the studio, because, I would always look at it as, oh, I've got this idea, like, yeah, it's 7, 8 o'clock at night, but I got to get this idea down. I gotta, uh, I got to get in. I got to, do my creative thing. And,
Yeah.
there'd be times where I'd be working, 12, 14 hours a day. I'd be working weekends and all this stuff. But then, it'd get to a point where I would, wake up on Saturday, and my wife's like, well, are you going to work? And I'm like, no, I'm not working today. And she's like, oh, well, if I would have known that, then I would have been able to, plan something. Uh, and she's like, if you need to work 12, 14 hours a day, that's fine. I just need to know which hours those are going to be,
Yeah.
and when you're going to be available to us to, to be able to do things. And so I did that. I implemented office hours. Basically, I'm in a spot where I do like 10 a.m. to about 6 p.m. Ish. And I try to stick to that. And it's turned out really well, because, now, if I have an idea at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, rather than coming out into the studio and trying to get it down, I'd like just like make a note of it. And then when I come into the studio in the morning, I'm like energized and I have ideas, and I'm like, okay, let's go, rather than like rolling into the studio with my coffee, sitting down, being like, okay, let's try to pull this creativity out of me. And so
Yeah.
overall it's working, but I'm still trying to find, trying to get the balance correct, and I think once I realize that it's always going to be in flux, um that it's made it a little easier.
Content creation for me has become a passion as of the past couple of years, where I realized I can actually do this. Like, I can create some things. I'm Even this conversation we're having now, I realized, I was like, I bet I could get a conversation with that guy where we talk about music and talk about the creative process. And here we are doing it. I'm like, I know this sounds silly. I'm like very proud of myself for that. But one thing that has been that struggle is I have 3 kids. I live in New York City. My wife is an assistant principal in the Bronx. I mean, she's a badass. She's got a
Hmm.
real life outside of, and we've had a very similar conversation like you're sharing, where it's like, I love everything you're doing. If you're going to do it, can we actually structure it a little bit? And I think that
Yeah.
there's this, I just think I'm sure there's people out there who just kind of do whatever they want all the time, but it feels like guys like you and me, we need that structure where it's like, this is a priority. This is also a priority, which, whether it's your
Hmm.
creative space, your job, your family, whatever, and to actually create the space, create intentional space for both, is the only way it grows healthily. And
Yeah.
if you don't do it like that, you chances are you will burn out. That's my
Yeah.
opinion. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's similar to, a lot of areas of life where, if you're not planning out and executing a plan, whether it's just a list or whatever,
Yeah.
like, your day, your week, your month, your life can kind of just happen to you, as opposed to like, setting an intention and saying, this is what I'm going to do, this is when I'm going to do it, and here's what I'm going to accomplish. Um, and there was a point for me, over COVID, times where, I absolutely got burnout. Like
Ugh.
I've mentioned this before, but like I never really gave any thought like my mental health as it pertains to me, because that was never a thought in my head. Like it's never anything I ever thought I had to think about, because I'm like, oh, I'm fine. I am happy. I'm happy with my life. I'm happy with my relationships, et cetera, et cetera. But there was a point over COVID where I was doing I was working on two projects at once
Wow.
for about a year. So I would work from uh 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then I would take 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. off for like my family time, which is
Yeah.
an hour.
Yeah.
And that would work from 7 p.m. to about 2 a.m. on the second project, and then I would go to sleep about 2:30 or 3, and then I would wake up at 8, and then I would start again at 9, and I did that 6 to 7 days a week for a year. And by the end of that, I had like a not a nervous breakdown per se, but
Yeah.
I had a moment where it just was all too much. And it was my wife who had to kind of center me and be like, I get that this is what you do, but you can't you you cannot do it like this. You need to figure
Yeah.
out another way to do it. Not like, it wasn't even like oh, like, maybe you could try XYZ. It's just like, this stops now. You can't do it. You got to figure out something else. And again, wise wife and all, when she says something like definitive like that, I've learned to just be like, okay, let me figure out how to do the thing that you're saying. And yeah, and it's a lot harder with if your career or the thing that you're doing is something that you also enjoy,
Yeah.
because you will by default in way more hours than you would doing any job. So I feel like you kind of have to keep that in the front of your mind as well. Whether it's, there, it happens a lot in the church, where people will volunteer at church or they'll work at church, and they're like, oh, like, I'm doing something good. I'm, helping out my community, blah, blah, blah. And they just give so many hours and they say yes to some things that, a year, 2 years goes by and they just leave.
Yep.
And it's something that I feel like a lot of people need to have an external force to tell them, hey, do not do that. Like, yeah, you could come in on Sunday and work on that thing, but you're not going to.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's interesting.
Yeah, I had a very similar conversation with my wife where she said something along the lines of like, I understand that you're struggling with this and you're feeling burnt out or you're feeling, whatever feelings you're feeling, but those are starting to now drip into our family as well. So now I'm saying to you, Patrick, like, we need to figure out how we can work on this because
Hmm.
it's not only affecting you anymore. So I just think it's thrilling that you and I have just transitioned into a parenting slash mental health podcast. This is great.
I love it, getting that mental health engagement.
Yeah, that's so good. Do you and you said like this is not just a you thing; it's kind of a band thing as well. Like you guys make intentional choices when you travel and probably how you travel and things like that to make sure that you guys are grounded and your families are cared for. I think that's incredible. And it's funny to hear you talk about some of these things because I learned a lot about I know not everything, but like I learned a lot about the internal workings of the band by listening to the that whole labeled series was incredible. Was that really
Yeah,
eye-opening for you to make as well?
absolutely. We've always tried to be a very open book when it comes to our ourselves, our creative process, everything. Like we're not the type of band who wants to have like an air of mystery or anything like that. Like we're very just like, hey, here's who we are. We make this music. We hope you enjoy it. Um, but that podcast was m- I can say it's the most real thing that we have ever done.
Yeah.
It's the most in depth as far as our, you know, internal relationships, our creative process. If anyone ever comes to me and says, "Hey, what's your creative process like?" My first thing is always, if you've got about 10 hours to spare, you've got a podcast where you will get the nitty gritty of our creative process. And I don't think we're ever going to be able to do anything again that gives that amount of information and that amount of access to way that we work, the way that we think, the way that we do everything. Um, so that was yeah, and I think that one of the reasons why that was such a, in my mind, you know, it's not like we like made money off that or anything, but it was very successful, I think, because we 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 were able to do what we wanted to do going into it, which was just give an unfiltered look into our creative process. But it was all Matt, and the label team really like guiding it. And you know, just we made ourselves an open book and we said, "Hey, ask us whatever you want and we'll tell you whatever you want."
Yeah.
And then they were able to put all that together. So you know, and you know, so that comes with, you know, working with people that we trust, and you know, saying things that, you know, may be somewhat embarrassing, but
Yeah.
recognizing that in the context of what we're doing, it's, you know, it's kind of necessary. And you know, I think that our view on music and creativity and everything has always been, you know, one of the most powerful things I think in any creative medium is for somebody to, if you're watching a movie, if you're listening to a song, if you're listening to a podcast, whatever it is, for someone to be able to experience the piece of art that you're making and sit back and go, "Oh, me too. Like I didn't
Yep.
know that other people felt this way." Um so I think that, you know, that podcast and, you know, hopefully everything we do elicits that in people. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that was crazy. And you know, again, going back to like the people who are finding Underoath now, they have access to, you know, YouTube videos and Instagram and all that kind of stuff. But for a scene kid like me, which by the way, I live in New York now, but I grew up in Orlando, Florida, fellow
Oh,
Florida
nice.
boy. So whenever you guys would come through, like I would get glimpses of what you do. I, you know, maybe get a high five or like, you know, metal horns at the front of the stage or something. But for scene kids like me who didn't have access to bands like that back in the day, a podcast like that was extremely eye-opening. I'm like hanging on every word, learning about the inner workings of how you guys came to be, who you were hearing every voice, you know, every band members past,
Hmm.
hearing, you know, even you know, engineers and producers talking about working with you guys. So that's incredible. It was so cool for you guys to be an open book. But I actually, there's a story I wish was included that I think, as far as your history and your band history, I think I was the only one to witness. Um, again, going back to
It was
that one
at this
fateful,
show. Yes.
yes, again, going back. And I wanted to bring this up to you because it made me fall in love with you guys even more. And I've told this story about 1,000 times. Okay, end of the suspense. Uh, During the show in this terrible gym, you guys had with you a disabled person.
Hmm.
And do you remember this?
Yeah. Oh, I know who you're talking. It was
Yeah.
our friend Russ. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was like, wow, cool. That, you know, giving a person who probably didn't have as much access, especially in a scene like that where there wasn't big stages and security and things like that, giving this person who would struggle to see you guys total access. It was really cool. It was really inspiring. But I witnessed this moment at the end of that show, and everybody's kind of packing up and leaving. I, of course, have just played open for one of my favorite bands, and I'm hanging around as long as possible. So people are clearing out. I'm still sticking around there. And I watched, just out of the corner of my eye, someone walked up to somebody in your band, and they said, "Hey, just so you know, Russ is his name.
Yeah.
They said, "Hey, just so you know, there was he had an accident."
Hmm.
And as I left the show that night, I watched as Underoath, the headlining band, separated themselves from everybody and helped this guy clean himself up before
Hmm.
then taking him with you to continue playing shows.
Yeah.
And it brought me, no one saw that I was aware of. I was literally leaving the venue, the gym. I was leaving the
Hmm.
gym, and in like I think it was at a church, in like this like Sunday school classroom or something off to the right. I just saw you guys taking care of someone who needed that help. And I know that's a pretty extreme story, but for me, and from what I've witnessed over the years, Underoath has always been that band that has connected with people on a level that's so far beyond music, even though music is great. And that story for me, it kind of changed my life a little bit because it was like, you know, it was ultimate humility, it was inclusion, it was like this celebration of everyone. And I don't know, I've never been able to share that story with one of you guys, and I've always wanted
Yeah.
to because it was so inspiring to me, and it just
Yeah.
shows who you
Well,
guys are.
yeah. And, I think that for us, how do I word this? Like, I think that none of us would really take that as any sort of like, oh my gosh, like you guys are like so awesome, like so cool, anything like that, because he was just a friend of ours. Like it
Yeah,
wasn't like, oh, there's like this make a wish guy that we want to like,
exactly.
give him an experience. Like he was just a friend of ours from our hometown. And I'm so thankful that my friend group, my family's friend group, our community, our family, like no matter what happens to us, we're always going to have those people there. Like me and my family, I know will never be on the street no matter how
Mm.
bad things get. And it's just about human decency. We're not anything special. Like we're not saints. We're not any, like we've screwed up so much, and so much of that being in the public eye that we would never even aspire to be like role models to people. We're more just like, hey, like we are who we are. We have our friends. We love our families. We love playing music. Here's all the times that we've screwed up. A lot of that is going to be talked about in song. And yeah, again, it just kind of comes back to that. Hopefully somebody would look at what we do, or uh, uh, listen to what we do and just be like, yeah, me too. Like that's cool. They're not anything special. I think that's kind of the whole crux of it.
Well, that's the whole answer right there, man. Like you guys, I mean, your band to me and to many others has always existed far beyond great songs. And isn't that how it should be?
Well,
Like,
thanks.
yeah,
I think so.
isn't that how it should be? Like people in positions of people who are in the position to create, who have somewhat of a following, being a shining example of humility in regular life, not only through there's plenty of people who write great songs that move people, but they're total jerks, in real
Mhm.
life. So to watch you guys, like just that little moment, big moment, for me in my life, I remember like just watching you guys have that human decency, but also be, in my opinion, rock stars, and it was just super super inspiring to me.
In
So
the gym, you know?
I'm just really I'm really thankful for that. And man, I'm thankful for not only Under Oath. I'm thankful to follow along with all the amazing things you're creating. I love when you talk about gear. I love following you on Instagram and like hearing like the scoring and stuff you're doing. But before we get out of here, I would love to hear in your opinion, what's the best place where people can follow you, where they can see your work, where they can learn about Underoath stuff through your perspective? Where should people be following you?
For me, honestly, the best thing is just Instagram, Twitter, etc. I try to be very accessible on both of those things. I can't always get back to everybody, but one of my favorite things about social media in general is just the accessibility. Somebody being able to send a message and say, "Hey, what was the plugin you used to make this sound?" Or "Hey, I'm shooting my shot. I want to do a podcast. Do you want to do it?" That sort of thing. So so that's probably the best way. My on Instagram and Twitter both, I'm just at Chris Underoath, so it's easy to remember.
That's awesome. And I mean, I guess my final question for you, do you want to give us any like sneak previews about like what you're currently working on, whether it's like Underoath or anything else? Is there anything you want to share with us about stuff coming out in the future, or is that all just top secret?
Oh yeah, we're always working on new stuff. We got a song that we just put out right before our last tour. We got another song that we're going to be getting out, I think, before our next tour. We've got about 2 more that we're working on. Working on some film stuff. Always working, always doing new stuff.
Well, I saw you guys when you came through with Spirit Box.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, that's the first time I saw Bad Omens.
That was the first time I saw Bad Omens too. But yeah,
they are incredible.
Yeah, they're great. Yeah, and Spirit Box too. That whole tour was just a great lineup, and Stray from the Path being on that was awesome.
Yes,
and yeah, it was. I was really stoked on that tour, and I was really glad that there were so many people that was their first time seeing either any of those bands. But particularly Spirit Box and Bad Omens. They right after that tour, they both really started to do a lot more. And and that's really our thing when we tour with any band, any band that we're bringing on a headlining tour of ours. It's always just hey, we like this band and we think that you should listen to this band. So not that it was our doing, but the fact that so many people are listening to both of those bands now, it makes us super stoked.
Yeah. I was so excited to see Spirit Box because they kind of blew up like mid-pandemic, because they were just like releasing like live stream after live stream. And then at your show, I was so excited to see you guys. But Bad Omens does their thing where they came out and they started with this song called, I know what it is now, Death of Peace of Mind. And it's just this guy, Noah, singing by himself. And all of a sudden, angelic voice. And then all of a sudden, the band joins him on stage. You probably saw this 1,000 times on tour, but and then all of a sudden, it's in this like very like metalcore scream song, and I'm just looking around, and I look at the guy behind me because he's actually filming it with his phone, and I go, "Who is this?" And he goes, and he just smiled. He goes, "Bad Omens," and I was like,
"That's
incredible.
The idea." Yeah, that's great. I love it.
It took me back because like I'm in this nostalgic place where I'm about to see this band that I grew up just loving, and I'm like I know the words and I'm singing along, but before that happens, I'm back in like my teenage years where I'm like discovering a band for the first time that I've never heard.
I love
before.
it.
Incredible. Well,
that's the whole idea. So that makes me happy.
Well, I'm so glad that you spent the time with me today, just chatting. Thank you so much for sharing so much about your story and your creative process and the band. And man, maybe one day we'll do it again, but I'm thankful for the convo today.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, bud. See ya. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget that links to everything you need can be found down in the description. And if you want to stay up to date with what I'm doing, you can always follow me on Instagram by subscribing to @PatrickMurphy. And while we're talking about subscribing, go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel as well. I'll see you in the next one. But don't forget, before you go, you should probably watch this video.